All right, we're in. Ooh, I botched it. I cut to the intro just a hair too early because I didn't know the song. I screened it very briefly and said this sounds like it's gonna be lit. So that was Vessels. They just came out with this album called Home. Um, and I was just earlier today talking to a dear friend and telling them a little bit uh, about navigating life, and because they brought up Wu Wei, and I said, yeah. Wu Wei is not about doing it lazy; it's about doing it effortless, right? So you have to let the energy carry your vessel. And then today I'm looking for some sort of metal music, just like metal album 2026. This bad boy popped up. I said, "Oh, it's called Vessels." Oh, I used the word vessel earlier today. I screened it real quick. Said, "Oh, this is the album. No questions or doubts." Because you got to follow the synchronicities to know how to have a good show. Let's have a good show. We got like 10 pages left, and it's we're done with the Talmud proper. We read all the tracts in this body of work, right? This does not have all of the other books outside of it, right? But I'm not taking this study that far, not at this stage in my life. Maybe in a few years when I'm coming back around to knowing this stuff, because I'm spending more time getting to know my ancestors, because I am more concerned about what is than what isn't. But also, there's a lot of stuff going on about the Jews. And I've been talking about it for a very, very long time. I've been worried about these anti Semitic days. And I think that we're getting a little bit better. Right? I think people want to be able to talk about this, talk about, quote, the Jews, and have not one iota of an interest in repeating history. Right? And I want to be a part of the conversation that does not repeat history, because there's literally nothing to repeat when you really de-occult what excuse me, what we covering this with responsible journalism are saying, right? And you gotta have some fucking patience with bits and pieces and fragments, and look at this idiot who doesn't know anything, and look at and here I'm gonna lecture you on this, and but then your lecture is just you letting me know that you say that I am wrong, but then you do not explain what was wrong. Even this one guy I'm arguing with in the comments sections, there's one conversation we're having, which is normal, and then another conversation where he's being a dick, so I'm being a dick back. Because I don't take no dick from you. If you talk like you don't know me, then I am going to treat you like a threat because you do not care to know me. Anyway, appendix. Page 24, volume 1 of this tract contains a Mishnah commencing with the statement, and these are some of the regulations enacted in the attic of Hananiah ben Hitzkiah ben Gen, and concluding, they enforced 18 regulations on that day. At the same time, the Mishnah fails to enumerate in the place mentioned or elsewhere these 18 regulations. The Gemara, however, conjectures upon their character and cites them in a scattered and incoherent manner. As a matter of course, this is not done without the adduction of numerous and varied opinions, but the conclusion is that the 18 regulations are those which we shall enumerate further on. In another section of the Gemara, it is related that 300 jars of wine and a like number of jars of oil were taken up into the attic in order to afford the sages no opportunity to leave their places until their deliberations concerning the regulations were finally concluded. Among these regulations, there are, however, only 2 or 3 concerning Sabbath, the rest being dispersed throughout the Talmud in their proper departments and merely mentioned as regulations enacted during that session. But they are not enumerated in the regular order either of sequence or time of enactment. Hence we, in consistency with our method of translation via to place everything in its proper department, have omitted it in this tract, the enumeration of these regulations. So here, this is a bigger explanation of what everything in the entirety of the Talmud is, as seen on Mr. Epstein's desk, concerning the reasons for their institution, which reasons, as cited by the Gemara, are very abstruse and for the most part untenable. In the last chapter of this tract, however, mention is again made of the 18 regulations, and it is declared that their measure was made heaping full, while elsewhere in the Gemara the assertion is made that the day on which they were enacted was as grave in its consequence for Israel as the day on which the golden calf was made. It is these 2 statements that have impelled us at the last moment to embody these 18 regulations in an appendix at the end of this volume, and state as best we can after careful study and consideration of the subject the most potent reasons for their enactment. With this purpose in view, we shall divide the 18 regulations into 5 classes as follows: those pertaining to theruma, heavy offerings; tuma, uncleanness. That's funny how it's tuma, like tumor. Or if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's not a tumor. I'm not unclean. Kaithon, mingling with other nations. Mikvah, legal bath, and Sabbath. Theruma is rendered useless when brought into contact with any of the following 10 subjects. First, with a man who eats a thing that had been contaminated by a parent of uncleanness, and had thus become unclean in the 1st degree. Second, with a man who had eaten a thing unclean in the 2nd degree, i.e. had been touched by a thing unclean in the 1st degree. Third, within a man who had drunk unclean beverage. Fourth, with a man who had bathed his head and the larger portion of his body in water that had been pumped up, drawn or scooped, and not in a legal bath. Fifth, with a clean person, i.e. one who had already taken a legal bath but was subsequently drenched with 3 lugs of drawn water. Sixth, with the sacred scrolls of the Holy Writ, either in part or in its entire form. Seventh, with hands of which one was not quite certain that they had been kept clean the whole day. Eighth, with one who had taken a legal bath if the theruma was touched before sunset. Ninth, with edibles and utensils which had become unclean through beverages, as will be explained in Tract Yodaim. When brought in contact with any of these 9 subjects, theruma is rendered useless. 10th, the crop raised from theruma, or seed, is of the same character as the seed. If the latter was clean when planted, the crop is clean. But if the seed was unclean, the crop is the same. Nevertheless, it is still considered theruma and subject to the laws of theruma. Thus, we have 10 regulations concerning theruma. Concerning uncleanness, there were 4 regulations enacted. First, all movable things bring uncleanness on a man by means of a tent. not larger even than a span, covering a corpse, even if the space between the corpse and the tent was but an all's width. For explanation, see Tract Ehaloth. Second, daughters of the Samaritans are considered unclean, as women suffering from their menstruation, from the day of their birth. And third, a child of a heathen is considered unclean. Yeah, fuck you, I'll be unclean all day, motherfucker. Fuck you. Because it is considered as one afflicted with venereal disease. Oh, I got venereal disease. That's what I got VD, folks. Anyway, one who presses grapes or olives, renders the vessels used to receive the must, or see, this is why people, you want to argue with me? Okay, fine. Take this seriously, please. Please take my venereal disease seriously, that I don't and have never had. Because you know what I take seriously? Being circumcised against my will as a child. How about that? Moving on. One who presses grapes or olives, yeah, really cleanness. This is explained in detailed tract of Kelim concerning Kython. But one regulation was enacted, covering 4 subjects. It was prohibited to partake of the bread, oil, or wine of other nations in order to prevent intermarriage with their daughters. Concerning mikvah, one regulation only was enacted, via, if the water running out of rain gutter flow directly into mikvah, the mikvah is not invalidated, but if the water was intercepted by a vessel from which it flowed into the mikvah, the latter becomes invalid. Or even if 3 lugs of drawn water were poured into the mikvah, excuse me. Ooh, I've lost my place. Mikvah was said so many times. Was poured into the mikvah, they render it useless. See Tract Mikveoth. Concerning Sabbath, 2 regulations were enacted. First, one shall not search for vermin or read before lamplight on Friday night. Second, one who was overtaken by dusk on the Sabbath eve while on the road must give his purse to a Gentile. Right. We did hear about that one in an earlier tract. That it exists. I'm not sure how. I think that it's just giving us the short form of a time where they acted on what was in there in the discussion categories about this stuff. Anyway, the learned reader who is not familiar with the intricate teachings of the Talmud, and even the student of the Talmud who has delved in its labyrinths of lore for the sake of probing into the ordinances and discussions contained in its volumes, will be quite amazed at the seeming unimportance and triviality of the above regulations, unless thoroughly comprehensive of the spirit of the Talmud and the object of the sages in their day. So that's a question of what is the spirit of the Talmud, which I would say is basically the Shekinah or Shekinah, and then the sages. You know, that's a discussion. That's a thread to pull on in Jewish studies, right? Maybe I will pull on that thread down the line. Don't know. Don't care enough after this. At the time when these regulations were enacted and enforced, there appeared no reasonable grounds for their enactment, and even the reasons advanced by the Gemara itself in a faltering, groping manner are in many instances quite absurd. Entirely contrary to their usual customs, the sages themselves did not base these regulations upon any inference, analogy, passage, or ordinance contained in the Holy Writ. A very remarkable occurrence indeed. Furthermore, at a casual glance, the student will not find in any one of the regulations a motive based even on common sense. Strange to say, it has also occurred that all excellent Hebrew poet L. Gordon, in a poem pungent with deepest sarcasm and pointed ridicule, commented upon these 18 regulations, saying, amongst other things, not for political purposes, not for the improvement of the government morale or material, did our sages seclude themselves in their attic, but merely to prohibit matters as trivial and absurd as that of reading by lamplight on the eve of Sabbath, etc.? Had the poet, however, devoted deeper study and closer research to the environment's influences and conditions prevailing in the days of these sages, he would readily have discovered that the greatest political import, the gravest question of government, both moral and material, actuated the institution of these apparently ridiculous regulations, all culminating in leaning towards the accomplishment of one great object via that of keeping the small nation of Jews intact and guarding it from the dangers menacing it not only from the exterior world, but from its interior vampires and oppressors. Oh. The Goyim are the vampires. Got it. Listen, there's an argument that we've been oppressors more than just the time of Mean Mr. Mustache, which, like I said, if you look at it in reality, it's a Jew-on-Jew affair. It's a Jew-on-Jew affair right now. Hollywood has been all fucking up on the Palestine and the Iran thing. All the liberalism is there. Everybody agrees. Nobody is fucking, praying for Israel on the left any fucking where. At all. To any decent degree for any fucking human person who doesn't understand the game being played on them. Jews that don't live in Israel, you are very fortunate that you get to have this discussion instead of worrying about missiles flying into your windows. You're welcome. So now learn a thing or two about how they hijacked your ancestors and put you in this category of persons of the Middle East called Jew. That allegedly is just 1/12 of a people of the Middle East called Hebrew. Which obviously intermarried with all sorts of folk. At least down the line. Right? And you're following an institution that had certain fertility rights that kept certain appropriated tribes together. Because somebody came along, found all the people that were basically worshiping their gods, turned it into worshiping their divine spirits instead of their gods. Then through these divine spirits and the sorcery of conjuring such spirits, wielded some wacky shit and distorted the infrastructure of your soul. And there's been this genetic manipulation on many levels, the neurolinguistic programming, the symbolic warping and distorting, right? The poor goat. The poor goat. What did the goat ever do to you? Except for Black Phillip, but he had it coming. Hey, what's up, Violence? Okay, so anyway. The vampires and the oppressors. I just want to know how they fucking rationalize vampire. They can rationalize oppressor because they've always been using the Egypt story, and then there's always the in general they got kicked out of a country story, and then you had the Spanish Inquisition, right? And then the Spanish Inquisition was like the pre-Holocaust, right? It's very interesting. This also interests me because knowing that I am of Templar descent now, all sorts of things, make sense. Straightened out, and you can't let that shit turn you into Sephiroth, because the guys who wrote Final Fantasy VII were geniuses. Right? Sephiroth, what did he do? He went all the way the fuck down the rabbit hole and fucking wrung himself out on the Klipoth. Because he didn't take enough time to find the harmonic magics, and he got totally wrapped up in being a slave to his ancestral identity, right? And he was a genetic manipulation, right? So, like, you know, he doesn't feel like he has any other real connection except to this weird alien specimen, you know, which is called Genova, because that was a play on Jehovah. It's so exemplary, the way that that story breaks down in its original form. We don't get enough of that out of Japan anymore. It's I hate it when the spirit of those values gets lost, right? You know. But we all have to learn lessons about what it is we want to preserve in wisdom and lessons, examples of attitudes for our children, right? You know? I mean, for me, I just like, don't I wish I was my age now with a kid or kids in the 80s and 90s. And how much fun it would be with the get on your bicycle, life's an adventure, and then you come home and then like dad's got wisdom, and then if the kids say there's a horror movie happening in my real life, I won't be the guys from every Stephen King novel with kids. I'll be like, oh my God, there's trouble, and my children who I deeply care about and actually pay attention to, and I don't smother whatsoever, and then I just go, it's just like, okay, where's this fucking demon? Right? But anyway, it should not be overlooked that when the deliberations it should not be overlooked that when the deliberations aren't these regulations were about to be commenced. I don't know if aren't is the right word, but onent, I don't know, is a word. I don't care enough to look it up. The hall used for the session was closely guarded by men armed with keen-edged swords, under instructions to permit all who desired to enter to do so, but to instantly thrust their swords through anyone endeavoring to retreat, and what was the discussion commenced with? Merely an argument determining the uncleanness of certain vessels. Wow! Holy shit, here comes... Well, vessels are mentioned all the time in this book. There's nothing... That's not even synchronistic. That just happens in this book enough, because that's the term they use for bowls and cups. And anyway, alright, I'm just really sensitive to when, the words pop up like that. Anyway, which the priests could not approach, as will be seen further on. Still, Hillel, the prince, the mighty sage, sat before his old-time opponent Shammai, and listened to him with the most profound attention and reverence, just as if he were the least among his disciples. This historical fact was but another item in inducing us to digress from our established method and insert the 18 regulations together with the explanation of their importance. For had we not done so, it is highly probable that we would have called down the criticism of many scholars who could not overlook such an omission. All right, we're going to take a pause right here and hit the break. We've got 6 more pages left, so we're running through that pretty fast. This show might be over in like half an hour, 40 minutes. I might not take another break after this. All right. And you're turning 39. All right. Good good, excellent time to start rocking and rolling with the togetherness of your shit. That's a little bit earlier than I got my shit together, by at least 2 years. So crack at it, man. Let's go here. So Vessels, that was called, the first song was called Flesh Throne. I should have mentioned the name of the song. Here's the album. All right. And then this next one is called Eternally Within.
Get tax expertise without hidden fees.
There we go. I thought I had 10 more seconds to fucking finish a sentence. Coherent sentences. There we go. How's going, Pasta Spliff? Hanging out in the chat. Let's do this with 6 pages left to go. At no period in the history of Jewish race do we find so much deliberation, profundity of thought, and depth of calculation and evidence as at the time when the sages secluded themselves in the attic of Hananiah ben Hitzkiah. There it was that means were devised to keep the nation of the Jews, whose friends were always in the minority and whose enemies not only abroad but in their very midst were as the sands of the sea, intact and proof against annihilation. All of the literature current among the masses was carefully scanned and revised. Right? You see, but this is the thing, is that people don't know that you're literally trying to keep a government up within another country, and that's kind of a you're not supposed to there's supposed to be one government for everybody, right? So you can have a club with all sorts of rules, right? That, I would never want, other than natural law, government regulations having anything to do with Seth Gizboza's ability to do his mystery school on his own fucking terms. It would have to, if they tried, it would have to become an underground illegal school because it cannot compromise, and it will only operate with those that want to find it. You are lucky that it is so well easily found today, despite it being suppressed. At the end of the day, it's just like a link sent is a link sent, right? And that's word of mouth, and word of mouth is the strongest foundation. It's like souls of concrete. Especially if you're active in the chat and you're a name that I know. All right. So because could one say operating in that manner is some form of an insurrection, right? And it's like you see, like, there's a bunch of things that they insist that they can do because they may not have a land, but it's like it's just like they carry their government with them. It would be like if America was destroyed and everybody tries to keep it alive using the United States Constitution, and the cultures become so alien to it or something, right? And I think the reason why we keep reliving, quote, Rome and all this stuff is that it works when it's not hijacked. Their system doesn't work, as evidenced in the Jewish war. Whatever you want to fucking say about Josephus, it makes sense to me with the way the whole fucking thing goes down. When you hear how they argue it themselves, and you can feel the psychic correspondence between the fundamentalist fucking rabbis in Israel and abroad who can speak at that level of Zionism, and how it influences the Knesset, which is a parliament. And, so, yeah, Bibi Netanyahu, but it's the Knesset because they're a parliament system. He's serving as parliament. I don't know. You tell me. The people of Israel are putting themselves through... They're doing it to themselves. Right? They are doing it to themselves, objectively speaking. Thus, it was commenced to accustom the Jew to study and thought, and as an outcome of the period of virtual renaissance, the 18 regulations were enacted with two prime objectives in view, as follows. Firstly, to diminish as far as possible the constantly growing domination of the priests, for the high priestdom, with which the supreme governing power was identical, could be purchased with money, and more especially because the number of priests in the last century prior to the destruction of the temple had grown to such a vast proportion. Are we talking about the bloodline priests or the recruited priests from the lower caste? Excuse me. Hope that wasn't too loud in your ear. Forgive me. But comes with the territory, as I am a chronic smoker. Anyway, had grown to such a vast proportion that those in actual service alone numbered little short of 20,000. Apart from these were those who did not perform actual service while enjoying all the immunities and privileges of their rank as priests, and they were priests who had the least blemish on their bodies. Those whose descent, or even those whose wives' descent, left the least room for doubt, and the wealthy and influential priests, who would not perform the menial duties of priests, but left them to the less fortunate and more insignificant of their numbers. See Die Priester und der Kultus by Dr. Adolf Buchler, Vienna, 1895. Yes, we must all go to the Adolf rhymes with Hitler from Vienna. Let's do that. A man who lived in Hitler. We'll go there. Let's go there. Because remember what our creepy little bastard said, Mr. Dershowitz, that it was German eugenics standards that everybody gets their genetic Jewish connective assumptions. Now, but it doesn't really matter how they tamper with the genetics. You've tampered with the story of their people in the first place, which is determined by a much more complex anthropological, archaeological commixture in correspondence to the written record, anything documented and recorded. So anyway, quite some time previous to the time of which we are treating, the layman had, after a hard struggle, succeeded in divesting the priests of their spiritual power, i.e., the right to decide all questions pertaining to religious and ritual matters, whether a thing was allowed or forbidden, clean or unclean, etc., by proving that the priests were far too ignorant to be competent judges. This struggle had been going on since the days of Nehemiah, for prior to his day the priests were the sole judges, both in spiritual and in temporal affairs, claiming their privilege in accordance with the passage in Deuteronomy 21:5, and after there the priest's decisions shall be done at every controversy and every injury. right? So understand, hear how all of this language is talking about the big gap in time where these particular priests are probably associated with whatever is going on with the antiquities narrative, right? Which we get the antiquities from Josephus, and I'm not sure who else in the plethora of writers is to be corresponded with, because Josephus is part of the agenda, right? Like he was part of trying to do this Messiah thing, right? So like he's an insult to those Jews and what they were trying to do. Not that Josephus or any of those Jews, with the exception of maybe like the guys up in the Melchizedek level, understand that they adopted it a long time ago, and it's very simple. You want to know how this starts? You want to know how this starts? You're wealthy. You pay off your fucking government because they want to allow you to do some sort of an experiment in which you just have to give a minor report. And then you have a movie called The Village by M. Night Shyamalan, which is a perfect example. So imagine you're in Babylon. You want to have an experiment with a unifying Sumerian mythos that has a government surrounding it, because we're upgrading from the Anunnaki narrative, right? We had our original animist tribal narrative in the region. Then we had the fall, in which they brought in all new entities and made brought in these entities that served close to the same function as the gods that they knew, and that's where we get our whole, all the Epic of Gilgamesh stuff and all that stuff, right? And all of that is an appropriation of truer older tales. And this is why when you read the mythos, you're able to just get this whole alien colony fucking narrative out of it, right? And, that's not an accident, because that's part of the spellcasts and how they summon them in. And if we don't get this right, when they want to drop disclosure, we're going to have the wrong relationship with these entities, right? Because if they're demons, you don't need to fucking go Ranger Rick on them. They're still fucking demons, right? They're taking some sort of a temporary manifested form. Probably, they're probably materializing as a condensed plasma body. Which, may have its own problems, because these entities coming into density can possibly make them uncontrollably hungry. We've seen this concept in the idea of the fallen angel, and they become demons because when they fall into matter, they fall into bodies of their own, and they don't know how to handle the fact that this is a body that needs consumption. And it's so overwhelming to the consciousness inside the vessel that they can't rationally think, and they're like a fast-moving zombie, and they're just like, there's some meat to take away the pain. Right? And it's just running towards this thing it needs to eat so it can stop feeling its state of dying. And the Satanist's job is to prime your vessel for that existence. To have a demon invasion through the zombie apocalypse, which is what we had. We lived through a demonic zombie invasion, and through forces that responded to our efforts in droves. We outlasted it. What's up, Howard? Okay. The time of Hananiah... Wait a minute. Wait, didn't I stop in the middle of this passage? After their priest... Having wrestled the spiritual power from the priest, the supervision of all religious and ritual matters was conferred upon the Pharisees, who henceforth were the recognized authority in the interpretation of the law. This accomplished, the next step decided upon was to limit as much as possible the temporal power of the priests. It was decided not to do this in too precipitate a manner, but cautiously and unostentatiously, using as a medium regulation, seemingly unimportant, but the hidden motives of which were far-reaching in their consequences. The time of Hananiah ben Hitzkiah was the more opportune for such a coup d'etat, as by the time the Pharisees had obtained the upper hand of all other existing sects, notably the Sadducees. Now, inasmuch as it proved to be an easy matter to enact laws by means of which the Jews would be prevented from amalgamating with other nations, such as the prohibition of partaking the bread, oil, etc. of Gentiles, a proclamation declaring the children of heathens unclean to prevent the children of Jews from joining them at play and thus forming attachments, and the women of the Samaritans, the deadliest enemies of the Jews, unclean in order to prevent their employment by servants by Jews. It was but little more difficult to devise laws which would forever break the oppressive domination of priests in a mild but nevertheless effective manner. Anthony makes videos. Let's see, I'm going to read this question. I hope I like it. Random question, but did you ever get in copyright trouble for reading Being in Time on any other book out loud on screen, any other live streams? No. Now, I'm an unmonetized channel, so that may have something to do with it. But no. Because I think I'm doing it in a book club style, such as stopping because it's a live stream and talking to you, it's like not really an audiobook. So no, I've never gotten in trouble for that, for Young and the Collective Unconscious. I mean, Stephen Flowers, Mr. Edward Thorson, is alive and walking this earth, and he has not shut me down for reading his book and criticizing it, as well as really blowing up good points. And he could. He went on Occult Rejects, and so he's going to have tertiary awareness of me, right? And knows that I speak against the trapezoid, I speak against... and I speak against all the Setian stuff that he is comfortable with, right? You know, he's not working with the Sephiroth as Edward Thorson, and that's great, though, right? So I give him props for that. And I get, on a naive level, why you would come to look at what you were thinking about in the attitude of the time in the 1970s, the attitudes, the morals, the circumstances of war at the time, and the mind war tactics. and at the end of the day, it just seems like you didn't even want to try anything else, right? Because, well, you came up out of that and you said, and somebody in the government said, hey, I think what you're doing is a great idea. And you said, yeah, I don't have to think about my responsibilities because the government will cover my ass if anybody gets killed. Right? Like, I know this is a barbaric and insulting oversimplification of the matter. But for fuck's sake, you people have not been helpful in things, right? You've not been helpful in anything about 9/11. You've not been helpful with anything with JFK. You've not been helpful with all these things. So I don't think our values are in alignment. You're probably more so my enemy, unfortunately speaking, right? Because I'm not really sure exactly what you want. And your friends are in question, right? It's just like covered Marina Abramovich. I kind of don't think she did anything wrong. But I don't think we're in alignment in any way, shape, or form either. Very cool. Thank you, Anthony Makes Videos. The first step necessary. So I guess this is going to take me a hot minute. Like I went on a really good tear there, so I'm surprised I'm not a few pages further along by now. The first step necessary for the accomplishment of this desirable end was to completely destroy the system of espionage practiced by the priests, and which was carried on such an extent that spies were constantly prying into actions and even utterances in the houses of the laymen. This was, however, by no means any easy task from the very fact that the priests were virtual shareholders in all the possessions of the laymen. So what kind of spies are we talking? Are we talking about Jew-on-Jew spying, and were these Jews like Roman informants or something? Or was it like they were informants of between the different tribes? Was this a Pharisee-Sadducee fucking war? What's the hubbub, bub? This was, however, by no means... The first step necessary to the accomplishment of this desirable end was to completely destroy the system of espionage. Right, okay, utterances, layman. So this is, however, by no means an easy task for the very... I'm sorry, I read all that. 1/50th of all grain raised by the peasants was their share as theruma. 1/10 of such grain comprised the tithe, and 1/10 of the tithe belonged to the priests individually. The first of the dough, the first of shorn wool, the parts of slaughtered cattle, the firstling of cattle, the first fruits of trees and produce, all belonged to the priests. And it was but natural that they were to be found in the houses of the laymen at all times. So this is exactly what you see with the Skeksis in the prequel series on Netflix for the Dark Crystal, where the Skeksis are in complete trust and perceived benevolence despite their corruption showing past all of their treatments and their cover-ups of them, right? But they put on a really great face, and then they give them all these offerings, and they do the job of taking care of the crystal and things like that, and building the nation in ways that they think they wanted, and convinced their wise woman who had direct connection to Thra, and took her away from her proper custodianship of the crystal, right? So, who's the Agma? Who is the real custodian of the spiritual principle that is not made clear in any of these books that the priests have, right? And I'm talking about what we know on the occult level, where all this bloodletting ends. It's the fucking bloodletting. And you have the fucking nerve to call us vampires. It was natural, but they were to be found in the houses of the laymen at all times, whether they would come not to humbly ask for their donations, but to demand it as the rightful possessors and shareholders. Because listen, in short, you can say, no, most Jews are not like that. Jews that are desperate to get that fucking temple built are permitting that. They want to permit it. They want mainline, upper-class Judaism all around to be exactly like Epstein, right? You know, you could be like a fucking middle manager prick and you get away with the greatest of atrocious sins. They're like at peace with going to hell, right? And I don't know exactly how it works for these guys. I mean, if they're psychopaths, what's going to happen is that they're going to go through the second death. Right? That's the real whole scales, the whole scales of the dead and the heart going into the jaws of Hammett. The question then arose how to find a place where the deliberations for the suppression of the constantly growing evil could be held without the presence of the spying priests, and to meet the exigencies of the case, an old decree that had been promulgated in the early days of the existence of the temple was again called into being and made effective. The decree was the one enacted in the time of Yos ben Yozar ish Izreda and Yos ben Yohanan the Jerusalemite, and read, all the lands outside of Judea are unclean, i.e. all the edibles and beverages containing any degree of sanctity whatever are rendered unclean by coming in contact with the soil of those lands outside of Judea. But aside from such edibles and beverages, nothing was rendered unclean. Now, the only edible beverage containing any sanctity whatever, which could be found outside of Jerusalem, where the sacrifice and other sanctified articles were brought, were the gifts of the theroma set aside for the priests. Thus we see the declaration of uncleanness, ostensibly directed against all edibles containing any degree of sanctity, was in reality directed against the theroma of the priests, while the priests themselves were flattered by the elevation of the theroma to the degree of high sanctity, and its object will be apparent from the following argument. And we'll get into that argument on the other side of the break, because, yep, we're going to have to take another break, because we still got about 2.5 pages left to go. The next song for us is going to be called The Beneath.
What's that?
It's nothing. Never mind that. Woo! You know, man, everything I do likes to act up my congestion. I'm never fucking sick. It's allergies and shit. Like, I work with dust, a lot of dust at work, and, and I wear a mask plenty enough. Plenty enough. And we got the green sweeping agent, keeps the dust down. A lot of the work doesn't get you there. But anyway. Dear God. The following argument. The Theruma is invested with sanctity, haha, he said titty, only when it is separated from the bulk. But while still a part of the entire crop, it is regarded as ordinary grain. If the Theruma were separated from the bulk in any land outside of Judea, the moment it comes in contact with the soil, it becomes unclean and unfit for use. This fact made it necessary to separate the Theruma in Judea. Notice that he is spelling Judea with A-E. The A-E, the Aether, the Adam and Eve, the hermaphroditic A-E. Aia. That's interesting. I wonder if James True knows that it's spelled like that in here. I'm gonna make sure he knows. And when you actually look at it, you know, because of the font type for AE, yeah, that's there's that one. There's that AE that Howard just put in the chat. That's cool that you can do that with the chat. But with this font type, the AE, it looks like a 6 and a 9, mirrored, a 6 and a 9 in the mirror. So they're reversed 6 and 9. Anyway, the transportation of the entire crop to Judea for such a purpose involving too much labor and expense, part of the crop was set aside in the field, and from that part a sufficient quantity was separated and was set aside in the field, and from that part it's sufficiently separated and sent to the Holy Land. There, the quantity of the Theruma, which according to the biblical ordinance could have been only 1 grain, but according to established custom amounted to 1/50th of the entire crop, was separated from the quantities sent. The consequence of this mode of procedure was that the presence of the priest at the place where the crop was harvested was no longer required, as he could not demand his share outside of Judea. Thus it was rendered possible to hold a convocation where the presence of the priest was no longer to be dreaded. It seemed that up to the time of Hananiah ben Hizkiah, this decree had been evidently disregarded or not sufficiently effective, for we see that 80 years prior to the destruction of the temple, it was again promulgated, and the time reinforced. Oh, that's interesting. He used the umlaut here. I kind of like that. So, like, it's spelled exactly the way you're used to it, but I guess he wanted to make sure that nobody ever said reinforced. Like, don't get a rename. It's sort of like, don't say reinforced. That'll be like gay, right? Re-en. So it goes, so to say long E, short E, reinforced. With the declaration that even the atmosphere, I might start doing that whenever, whenever I see it, wherever I see it, and I know that it's spelled that way, I'm going to put those dots in. Like anytime it's supposed to go to long to short, or short to long vowel. Anyway, that even the atmosphere of all lands outside of Judea was unclean, and all articles containing any degree of sanctity were rendered unclean by contact with such atmosphere. The 80 years before the destruction of the temple correspond with the time of Hananiah ben Hezekiah, and it is quite possible that the sages called by the Talmud the sages of the 80 years were the same that took part in the deliberations in the attic. Oh, hold on a second. Not that it matters. Okay, sorry. Deliberations in the attic, and that in order to secure at least one place where they could hold a convocation undisturbed by the priests, they declared even the atmosphere of the lands outside of Judea unclean. Boy, all this stuff happened in an attic somewhere, right? You know, like what's her face? Anne Frank. She hid in the attic. Or was it the basement? Pretty sure it was the attic. I'm pretty sure she got the attic. Like, when you're in trouble like that, if you get a chance to do the attic, you want to be in the attic because you can get out. You can break a hole through the roof, or the walls, or through a window, and escape. But if you're in the basement, there's probably going to be some blasting involved, and it's a small basement. That's not happening. So you might have to get like a chisel and a herring, because the knights who said knee only gave you a herring to chop down granite. Anyway, knee. Still. Wait. The Talmud relates also to that in the city of Usha. The decree was reinforced for the third time. Why did I read that again? It's like I was just talking about reinforced for fucking 15 minutes. All right. Still, the decree was not as effective as it should have been, as long as the priests could come and announce that he would use his share of the terma to seed or dispose of it as seed. And to meet this exigency, the sages of the attic first of all decreed that the crops raised from clean or unclean terma used as seed were clean or unclean respectively. Again, you know how I know something's clean? I've wiped it off. Washed it as appropriate for what it is. Again, means had to be devised to rid the layman residing in Judea proper from the obnoxious presence of the priests at all times. For at harvest time, or when the grain was brought from the lands outside of Judea, the ever-watchful priest was on band. To this end, the subsequent regulations concerning therma were enacted and gradually reinforced. Thus, at first, a man who had eaten a thing unclean in the first degree rendered therma useless. Then a man who had eaten a thing in the second degree of uncleanness. Until finally, even a sacred scroll, or even a hand that had come in contact with a sacred scroll, and at last of all, a hand that was not known to be positively clean, rendered therma useless. All this was done with the sole object of keeping the priests out of the houses of the laymen, and rather bring the therma to them than have them come to demand it. Should they come in spite of this, it was not difficult to find a pretext for calling the therma unclean. In order, however, to make the purpose of these regulations too apparent, and thus give offense to the priests, other regulations were enacted in conjunction with them, while of no value whatever in themselves, acted as screens for the actual intentions. It is now not difficult to explain the historical sensation caused by the deference shown by Hillel to Shammai at the commencement of these deliberations. And you know, it's really funny when you think about it, because, Shammai is unquestionably an outsider, right? It's explained, that is explained in one of the articles that I read, looking up various things in conjunction. You can go back to prior volumes where I kind of hatchet at all of these little things, right? You know, I do a lot of work on these streams, and I'm not trying to hit everything. That is called madness with this kind of material, which is this is just like a Uranus Mercury square of some sort did this. That's what I think. I think when this happened, when this fucking shit was put together, it was like Uranus and Mercury were like squaring each other in retrograde at the same fucking time. It must have happened during some horrible astrology for it to fucking shit out this way. Anyway, and if it wasn't, that would be crazy to me. And the reasons in which they prompted posting armed guards at the entrance of the hall. Hillel, in his capacity as a prince of Israel, was somewhat too timid to proceed against the priests in too harsh a manner. But the masses were so much incensed against their oppressors and so deeply conscious of their grievances that he could not stem the popular tide against them. You know, I feel like this is kind of like the precursor to Martin Luther. I think that this is kind of like the Jewish equivalent of Lutheranism. Right? Like this is kind of the itness of it, right? And I think that there's a greater Jewish, it's not a civil war, it's a sectarian war, right? Between interpretations of these two that go way beyond the whatever, because I think once the Shammai school lost its backing by the state of Israel, because Rome took it back, that these two schools, the one that, Hillel, the outsider school, I think it went out there with its more lax standards. Some of them stuck with the others because they were more honest about sticking with those traditions, and they are the closer to conservative Jews, right? The corruption is interesting, right? Because there's something very atheist about Jeffrey Epstein, right? Which makes sense on so many levels, right? And just owning Jewish Marxist supremacist identity, because he's a psychopath, right? So he's a psychopath, and so he's a psychopath who was born into being a Jew. And he decided to fucking own that because he discovered that he could choose whatever kind of Jew he wanted to be because he qualified as a Jew. Like this is how he built his relationship with Alan Dershowitz. Atheist with extra steps. I love it, Howard. You could say the same thing for Satanism. Because theatrical Satanism is just atheism with some sort of tradition for shits and giggles. Right? He could not stem the popular tide against them. In this emergency, it was Shammai, under ordinary circumstances of lesser consequences than Hillel, that proved to be the champion of the popular cause. And in order to ensure for him a telling majority when the question came up for a final vote, the doors of the hall were guarded so that none could leave, while all were allowed to enter. Seeing the patriotism and popularity of Shammai, the prince could not help bowing to popular sentiment and showing respect to the favorite of the hour. It would require a volume of many, many pages to demonstrate how each one of the regulations instituted was directed against the priests, how deeply it injured them, and in what measure it curtailed their previous unlimited sphere of action. That's interesting. These regulations were about a power grab. They were dethroning the priests. And were they trying to replace the priests because they were false priests? Or were they trying to have a different system altogether? Right? Because this is all important, because if you've never listened to Manly P. Hall's lectures on the secret destiny of America and its connection to Plato's philosopher kings, the priests here are a theocratic version of this, kind of like the way the mullahs are in Iran. This is why I don't like fundamentalists. And in what measure it curtailed their previous unlimited sphere of action. Also, especially how they dispute Hillel Shammai concerning susceptibility to uncleanness of vessels used at grape and olive pressings concern the priests. Even then, a person not thoroughly imbued with the spirit of those times could scarcely understand it. Yeah, no, I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's just like, you're bugging out. Like, it wasn't cleaned properly, but it was definitely cleaned. Right? I mean, like, but it was cleaned properly, but by a different standard than you know, because it was a different process. Right? And there was some reason why Shammai or Hillel just had to do it differently. Right? So, I don't know when Set came in as the outsider, as the god of foreigners that he also represents, came in to this whole shtick, because we all know that this whole shtick is what I said it was earlier about creating a uniform Sumerian thingamajiggy revolving around, a storm god, because of war and fertility. Storm gods are for war and fertility. Thor with his fucking ridiculously big hammer with a short handle. Anyway, relating to Therma were directed entirely against the priests, and 4 concerning uncleanness were in part against the priests and in part against mingling with other nations. As for the regulations against mingling, that goes without saying, while the regulations concerning the mikvah and Sabbath were but incidental and trivial matters, intended as a screen for the grave importance of those mentioned. All right, so here are our footnotes. You can take notes of the footnotes. This is the last page. That's it. That's the whole file. Woo! So, with the exception of all of the references, like the Gidin and the Ibid and all that stuff, to go look into all of that, this here kind of gives us a central vein of kind of like understanding probably what is the most important aspect of the Talmud as far as everyday Jewish function is concerned. There's probably all sorts of very interesting shit. I've been pronouncing things weird for the sake of these fucking words for too long. Shit. Out there in the diaspora of their crazy literature. But I'm good. I'm good here, man. Thanks. But now that I have done this, if it comes up, like, let's just say in the news, some fucking black magic spell pops up, and then somebody covering it on YouTube mentions that there's a verse from the Talmud in it, and I don't know it because it's in one of the things. I'll be like, ooh, that's interesting. Let me check that out. Because I will have a baseline of understanding of the Talmud in general to leap off of. Right? And that'll be fine, because that'll just be me keeping up with what everybody else in the occult field knows. Right? Yeah, it is like NLP. Well, that's because it is NLP. Right? Because you're getting into some... You're getting into very... This is all judicial processing stuff. It's all legalese. Right? It's all, contract-bound behavioral operations. It's ridiculous that you would keep a government so that way you could, like, whatever... It's just, it's this thing they want to do because it's a way of having an economy within the tribe. Hey, what's up, Lucy Rose? Up? I don't know what to tell people. What I am going to tell you is you guys have a great night, and we'll figure out what I want to do in the future. I'm gonna read for a long-form book in my personal time. I'm gonna get to Children of Dune, if you didn't hear me talk about it earlier today. And I'm probably not gonna finish it by the time it comes out, by the time Dune 3 comes out in the theaters. Because it's a big chunkin' book, and I got all sorts of life to do, and I'm not gonna stop making live streams. I'm just not gonna take on an enormous fucking thing until later. Later, I'll do an enormous thing. But I will find some cool short stuff to do. I may even have a thing or two on my damn mind. All right. Have a good night.